Camera's on. Speaker works. Projector's good. What am I forgetting? Head's on.
Your class. We're not here, we're just looking at your imagination.
That could be. But even if that's the case, you should act on your figment. Of course, that gets psychotics in trouble. Especially like when you're trying to kill the enemy, and it turns out to be your mom. That's not good. Don't want to do that. Seems like we've had some of those just in town the last couple days. I think it was yesterday they had some guy with a BB gun, pulled it out on the cops. What was he thinking? What was going through his head? Let me pull out a BB gun that won't do any damage but looks like a real gun and aim it at police so that they will shoot me to death. Pardon?
I said it was the world's worst April Fool's joke, that's for sure. It was so realistic that they couldn't tell.
Oh, right. Well, there's been lots of cases of that. Toy guns that look too realistic. Little kids playing with guns in playgrounds in major cities have been shot by the police because a kid had no idea that he looked like a threat. But then when the jury thinks about it, they say, yeah, well, the policemen did their job. There wasn't anything they could have done. They already put their lives on the line every day, practically, depending on where they are. So how do you know that it's a psychosis, and how do you know? I remember in the movie A Beautiful Mind, A Great Mind, A Great Brain. I forget what the one about John Nash. Anybody remember? Beautiful Mind. Okay. Directed by Ron Howard. Full of lies, by the way. If you read about John Nash's real life and the way the movie portrayed everything, it's full of lies. Because the real life wouldn't have been a very interesting movie, basically. But there's one scene where somebody comes up and starts talking to him in the hallway at the school in Princeton. And John Nash, the character, looks at, and that's the actor he's portrayed lots. He was the gladiator, Russell Crowe. He looks at the guy and he goes, and pokes up to see if he's really there, And that's hilarious, that he goes to that level to check and see, is this a real person talking to me, or is that one of my illusions? But that, spoiler alert, that's a scary movie. I'm not sure how close it is, of course, to the truth, because I know certain things are lies. Like, for example, that he was happily married, his wife loved him all the way through. No, that actually she hated it. She divorced him, all that sort of thing. Plus, his son had the same thing, too. But I'm losing my train of thought. Did I have a train of thought? I might have. But, because in the movie he has a roommate who is like his best friend all the way through. And the only way he figures out that his roommate doesn't really exist but is a psychosis, a part of his psychosis, is when he realizes that his roommate's daughter never ages. Even though they've been friends and the daughter has been present for a lot of meetings for years, she's still just a little girl. And that's when it dawns on him that even his best friend turns out to be a psychosis. So, pretty interesting. And you guys are at the age where psychoses really begin. So if you have symptoms, check the symptoms. You're depressed, that could be a symptom of an oncoming psychotic experience, etc. And using drugs like LSD and things of that sort, all of that can actually make those things worse. So be careful in your experimentation and stuff. Plus, if you want a job in the military intelligence or any position that requires a top secret clearance, don't use any of that stuff because you'll never get the job. And that's a pretty neat, from my own experience, right? That's how I ended up. Never occurred to me that I should be a good person and follow all the laws, not get in trouble, even though a lot of my contemporaries were breaking some of them, like smoking marijuana and things of that sort. Never occurred to me that if I do those things, then I won't have a future. But as a matter of fact, it turned out that I ended up with a future because I didn't do any of those things. So, kind of interesting. Okay, so we should get started. We have the piano tuner next door. Who's tuning the 3 pianos in there. But so, should I start off by asking if you have any questions for me so far? We're getting close. We're in the last third of the course now. This is lecture 21 out of 30. And we really only have 29 because the last 2 sessions are together. And we're actually not even required for you to come to those. Well, the last session will be a movie. At the final session, I'll play a movie. I'll bring 4 or 5 different movies, and whoever's here gets to vote on what movie they want to watch. And that's what, hopefully. But I have some interesting ones. Wittgenstein, I have The End of the Tour, which is about David Foster Wallace, if you find him interesting. But some others like Ex Machina or Ex Machina, if you're familiar with that. It's a problem of the Chinese room test or AI. What kind of robots are we going to have in the future? So lots of different possibilities. I have Gravity. Yeah, not happy with Gravity. Yeah, I have to admit the plot for that was a real letdown. Not funny. Okay, so let's look at Appiah. So today's April 2nd, so no more April Fool's jokes. I read that Trump, President Trump apologized for everything he's ever done, etc. Turned out, well, no, that's April Fool's. Did Fox News really say that he's planning on cutting funding to 3 Mexican countries? Did they really said that, or was that an April Fool's joke?
No, there's a huge caravan coming from down there, so that's just it.
I mean, did Fox News actually call Guatemala, Honduras, Mexican countries? That's because of course there's only one Mexican country, Mexico. Honduras is not Mexican. Sorry, that was, so everybody is slapping their head and going, Fox News, thank you for giving us another hilarious. But the thing is, that could very well have been somebody faked that on April Fool's and posted it so that everybody would be absolutely full of hilaritude on April Fool's. But so of course I shared it on Facebook just like everyone else I knew, But at the same time, I wondered, you know, one person said, hey, this is April Fool's, guys, you know. But how do you know? We could check Snoops, is it? Snopes? Let's see. But, okay. So who is Appiah, or Appiah? Let me show you what I've found of him. So I found his official site not very helpful. But so he's slightly younger than me, 3 years younger than me. Speaks with a British accent, and as far as I know, that's the only language he speaks, other than whatever he learned at school, even though his father was from Ghana. And he was sort of royalty from there. But his mother was also British royalty, so he's clearly elite, member of the elite. He points that out, that he had the advantage of the best schools, the best boarding schools in Britain, went to the best schools, Cambridge. Thanks to his degrees from Cambridge, he went on to teach at Harvard and Columbia and now Princeton and so on. So he recognizes he himself as part of the educated elite, you know, silver spoon, all of that sort of thing. And yet he's also mixed race. And as a result, he noted, for example, that when he gets into a cab, the cab driver will immediately ask him, where are you from? And when he points out he's from London, that doesn't really help, because what the person's really trying to find out is, what are you? And that's especially an important question in the United States, you know, where, especially right now with the identity politics that we're at least discussing, that Francis Fukuyama talks about. By the way, there was a comparison between Fukuyama's book on identity and Appiah's book, The Lies That Bind. And part of what he will argue, in fact, I'll show part of the, let's just go find the video here. He did a TEDx talk. Let's see if I could find it. Okay, so this one.
People say things about religion all the time. The late, great Christopher Hitchens wrote a book called God is Great, whose subtitle was Religion Poisons Everything.
Actually, the title of the book was God is Not
But
Great.
last month in Time magazine, Rabbi David Wolpe, who I gather was referred to as America's rabbi, said to balance that against that negative characterization, that no important form of social change can be brought about except through organized religion. Now, remarks of this sort on the negative and the positive side are very old. I have one in my pocket here from the 1st century BCE by Lucretius, the author of On the Nature of Things, who said, tantum religio potuit suadere malorum. I should have been able to learn that by heart. Which is, that's how much religion is able to persuade people to do evil. And he was talking about the fact of Agamemnon's decision to place his daughter Appiah on an altar of sacrifice in order to preserve the prospects of his army. So there have been these long debates over the centuries, in that case actually we can say over the millennia, about religion. People have talked about it a lot, and they've said good and bad and indifferent things about it. What I want to persuade you of today is of a very simple claim, which is that these debates are, in a certain sense, preposterous, because there is no such thing as religion about which to make these claims. There isn't a thing called religion, and so it can't be good or bad. It can't even be indifferent. And if you think about claims about the non-existence of things, one obvious way to try and establish the non-existence of a purported thing would be to offer a definition of that thing and then to see whether anything satisfies it. And I'm going to start out on that little route to begin with. So, if you look in the dictionaries and if you think about it, one very natural definition of religion is that it involves belief in God or in spiritual beings. As I say, this is in many dictionaries, but you'll also find it actually in the work of Sir Edward Tyler, who was the first professor of anthropology at Oxford, one of the first modern anthropologists. In his book on primitive culture, he says the heart of religion is what he called animism, that is, belief in spiritual agency, belief in spirits. First problem for that definition is from a recent novel by Paul Beatty called Tough. There's a guy talking to a rabbi. The rabbi says he doesn't believe in God. The guy says, "You're a rabbi, how can you not believe in God?" And the reply is, "It's what's so great about being Jewish. You don't have to believe in a God per se, just in being Jewish." So if this guy is a rabbi and a Jewish rabbi, and if you have to believe in God in order to be religious, then we have the rather counterintuitive conclusion that since it's possible to be Jewish rabbi without believing in God, Judaism isn't a religion. That seems like a pretty counterintuitive thought. Here's another argument against this view. A friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine, went to his grandfather when he was very young, a child, and said to him, "I want to talk to you about religion." And his grandfather said, "You're too young, come back when you're a teenager." So he came back when he was a teenager, and he said to his grandfather, "It may be a bit late now because I've discovered that I don't believe in the gods." And his grandfather, who was a wise man, said, "Oh, so you belong to the atheist branch of the Hindu tradition." And finally, there's this guy who famously doesn't believe in God. His name is the Dalai Lama. He often jokes that he's one of the world's leading atheists. But it's true, because the Dalai Lama's religion does not involve belief in God. Now, you might think this just shows that I've given you the wrong definition.
Exactly. Which is what I would argue. Now, the thing is, he's trying to do away with the religion by saying it's essentially one of the lies that bind us, and by stopping believing in that as an object, we can get away from the binding, which in this case is harmful because it creates contention between the different so-called religions that are harmful to society, right? So that's the approach that he's taking on that. But when I define religion, I certainly am trying to take that difficulty into account. So I define it as belief in meta-narratives. I think we've looked at this before, right? Sorry, the pages. I never fixed the page. But so I define being religious as believing in a meta-narrative, a big story that is big because it explains everything, right? Why are they important? Why would I say that every human being basically has to be religious in order to function well? And that's because we're homo neurons, as Frederick Jamison says. We man the storyteller, right? Instead of Homo sapiens sapiens, he refers to us as homo neurons. That's Frederick Jamison. I should show you who he is. He's on my list, but I don't think anyone's picked him this year. Have we? Anybody pick Fred? In any case, he refers to Homo sapiens as homo neurons, man the storyteller. So we're, what's our universal, one of our universal characteristics? We tell stories. That's how we think, basically. We think in story form. Science seems to go against that to some extent because we're thinking in terms of such small stories. We call them experiments or facts, right? That we don't think of that necessarily as a story. In fact, if we think of that as technical writing's main problem for us is that it's not telling a story. And so we have a hard time remembering it. Typically, in order to remember things in a technical piece, what we have to do is repeat it, memorize it, basically. Remember when I asked you the 10 Commandment quiz, that was an example of technical writing. 10 Commandments, not a story. So you can't put it together in a way that you'll remember the whole story. Instead, what you have to do is memorize the 10 Commandments and repeat them every so often, or you don't remember what they are. But if we remember a story, like The Lion King, you can remember how Scar kills his brother, because it's, as soon as you dip into the story, you know the whole story, and you know all the parts of the story, so you could easily remember an hour and a half long narrative compared to 10 statements, etc. So homo neurons. But the big picture is a story, and this is what, of course, we say Shakespeare's talking about when he says all men are actors with their various roles and their entrances and exits, right? All the world's a stage, and all of us are actors, right? Etc. And you might say, okay, well, not everybody needs to believe in a story precisely, and that's, I think, one explanation for why so many people are depressed and maybe even suicidal. In a sense, that's a story. If you feel like the only value you have in the world is to exit it, because no one likes you, no one loves you, there's no place for you in the universe, there's no reason for you to be here, no reason to continue to suffer if you're suffering. You might not even be suffering. You might be just mentally suffering because you don't have a purpose. Well, where do you get the purpose from? You get it from the story that you believe is true and that you have a role that you're playing in it, right? Yes, of course, that role can change. That's, in a sense, what being saved is. You go from a position where you don't feel like you have any purpose, all of a sudden you find a group that gives you enthusiasm, belief in their collective meta-narrative. You adopt it for yourself, and mentally now you're elated because you now have a sense of purpose. You know what you want to do in the morning, etc. Right? So if you think of it that way, everyone needs a meta-narrative, otherwise we're ill. We don't have a sense of purpose. We don't have a story we believe in. And so basically I would argue that the collective sense in which religion is something that all people have comes from our belief in a meta-narrative, a story that basically gives us that sense of purpose and the values that we need in order to give a hierarchy to the things that we have to choose. Right? In fact, excuse me, one of the definitions of God that comes from Paul Tillich is that God is our ultimate concern. And in that sense, the ultimate concern, of course, is our highest value. So even if you can't quite think of what God is for you, and that wouldn't be unusual, since by saying ultimate, absolute, omnipotent, etc., the beginning of everything, whatever, that automatically puts it out of our finite understanding. But at the same time, there's a sense of direction, that the values are in that direction. So we might ask, what's our highest value? What's our divine value? Love? Is it love? When did it become love? That was traditionally associated with Christianity. It might have affected other religions that didn't have love as their primary value in retrospect, but it seems like it was Christianity somehow that introduced that concept of love. So I would argue against his definition of religion that he's using here, but then I have different purposes for it. I think of religion in a sociological sense, and he's looking at it in terms of the conflicts that it causes, and in a sense he's in agreement with Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, that overall religion tends to be a bad thing right now, that what our times is calling for, and identity is an important part of this. When we think of identity politics and so on, what we're doing today is becoming more of a worldwide melting pot, where we need to do away with these aspects of our meta-narratives that cause conflict. And so thinking of myself as a particular religion, which is against other religions, causes conflicts. And we could see those, of course, in the Middle East. We could see those in New Zealand, unfortunately, recently, and so on, right? So his concern is good, to try to help prevent those kinds of conflicts. People writing things on churches or synagogues or gravestones or memorials, knocking them over, burning churches in France. That's apparently an ongoing thing right now. That doesn't show up in our news, but if you look at European news, it's of course a big thing. Even the Church of Saint-Sulpice in Paris has been, it was set on fire. See if I can find it. That's a famous one. A lot of tourists go there. What was weird? How short the video was? I think it was meant to be that short. Yes? Is that what was weird? What was weird? Are we
I was just asking if it was on Twitter.
Is it? I guess you could, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing with this. That was only a 4-second video, so it looks like it deserved a lot more video than that, but maybe there is other, but you get the idea. So there's a lot of things happening in the world that we, of course, don't necessarily get in our news because we're focused on, decreasing funding and aid to 3 other Mexican countries. That was a joke. You guys didn't. I should ask. Did Fox News really say 3 other Mexicans? They did. Or is this fake too? Sorry, that's enough to just screw your mind for the whole rest of the day. Right? Sarah Palin had nothing to do with that, as far as I know, by the way. Stop it. Stop. Hey, I like Sarah Palin. She's a nice person. Okay. So, I think from a sociological point of view, when we think about what religion does for a person, that actually coincides with another aspect of Anthony Appiah's argument. In fact, I find it very similar to William James. When William James, back in 1901, 1902, argues in the varieties of the religious experience, doesn't say that a particular religion is the best religion or anything of that sort. Instead, he argues that religion is good for us. Psychologically, religion is good for us. So the will to believe, another one of his articles and books, actually, because it's not only the article title, but that becomes the title of a collection of essays. But the will to believe is that psychologically, we have this desire to believe in something that's larger than ourselves, and in that sense, it's not, well, the university. I mean, the university is larger than ourselves. The universe is larger than ourselves. The multiverse is even larger, right? So obviously we believe in larger things. But what James really means is that larger thing than ourselves is related to us in some way, that we have some sort of personal investment in that larger thing. And it does in us. The universe loves us. You might think, well, that's a silly thing to say. But actually, if you think about it, how many times have you heard that, well, human beings are at the top of the food chain? We're special. We get the benefits of intelligence and thumbs, all these different things that make being a human absolutely so much better than life as a turtle, right? We can eat turtle soup if we want, but have you ever heard of turtles feasting on humans? No, doesn't happen, right? Of course, once we're dead, then all sorts of other things will feast on us unless they embalm us with some fluid that keeps things from eating us. Probably not good. Not good for the environment. Right? Plus, they put us in a box to try to keep everything from getting to us, I suppose. But as Gottfried Leibniz discovered because he was one of the first generations to have a microscope. When he looked at a dead body, he discovered that even though they say it's a dead body, it's wrong. There's a lot more life going on there than there was before. Because he's looking at all the little bacteria and things that are eating the corpse, right? So, whole nother way of thinking about that. But obviously, the universe loves us because it puts us in such a high position compared to everything else. We might say, well, but look how long it took for the universe to put us here. You know, everything from the very beginning of the universe to right now, you know, if you think of it as spanning from here to here, humans on the surface of the earth are just this tip of my fingernail in time, right? Well, so the universe took a long time getting to the best part. There's all sorts of ways of interpreting all of that, right? But if we think anthropocentrically, man is the center, and quite a lot of our theories certainly do that, right? And some of the conflicting narratives, which I still think of as clearly religious, argue that, well, we've been fooling ourselves all this time. You know, Carl Sagan, the little blue dot, you know, thanks to Voyager as it was leaving our space and looking back and taking a picture of us, the Earth is just a little blue dot. And Carl Sagan took that as a piece to say just how insignificant we were in the universe. Thought of that as a powerful tool to, you know, argue against religion. You know, the demon-haunted world, he called it, right? You know, that we're in so many of our primitive beliefs, we believe in demons and spirits, and none of that is true. And so he relished the idea, I think, of confronting traditional meta-narratives by arguing instead for the scientific narrative that, again, does away with those religious narratives. But Anthony Appiah does argue along with James that the significant thing about this so-called religion phenomena is what it does to the person, right? You know, while he'll, on the one hand, argue, I'm pointing over there to the book, right, the lies. Did I just do that? The lies that bind. Religion is important to us, even if it isn't a thing that you can easily identify as belief in God, for example. Because he basically argues, it can't be just that. Because there are, of course, a lot of so-called religions that don't believe in God. So therefore, the definition doesn't work, so there is no such thing. Well, of course, if you take it from the point of view that it's the practical experience of people, what are they experiencing? They're getting a belief in how they should live and what's important in life. And that's, to me, the central focus of religion. And you might not want to call it that. You might want to call it something else. I think it certainly is silly to point out. I mean, I enjoy it. I think it's fun. When I went to Richard Dawkins' presentation in Fairbanks a few summers ago, and there were 400 plus people gathered in the auditorium at UAF, and he started testing the waters and seeing if the crowd liked him saying bad things about religion. and as they cheered and, started saying amen, oh, well, they didn't say amen, but, it was an awful lot like a church crowd going amen, people standing up and all thrilled. Remember, my wife smacked me because she hated that, right? My wife is not physically violent, but occasional, is good for the soul. But to me, it was a religious experience for atheists, That's the atheist tradition of the Western religions, right? And you certainly have values. There's an organization, a foundation called the FFRF, Freedom from Religion Foundation, which I know about because one of my friends who I respect very highly is a member and occasionally wears his little pin that says FFRF, and he's given me the newsletter, and out of curiosity I thought, so of course their focus is to emphasize something that a lot of Americans like to emphasize, and that is that the state should be free from religion. We don't want a specific religion imposing its beliefs on a secular state, right? Such as the Ten Commandments in, the lobby or the public park, things of that sort. But I looked on the website for their definition of religion, and they don't have one, as far as I can find. So their main emphasis is freedom from religion, but nowhere in the foundation literature did I see any actual definition of what they're considering a religion. I suppose they consider that common knowledge, although, of course, that might be true if you're thinking in terms of a specific culture. Anthony Appiah, of course, is looking at as many cultures as possible. And when you do that, you're not going to find it easy to define what religion is. And by the way, this is, of course, essential to our concept of identity, because that in defining our roles defines what we consider to be the most important part of our identity. When I was a kid growing up in high school and so on, we were all Roman Catholics. It's a Roman Catholic high school. About 3,000 in the high school. My graduating class had 666, which I thought was a kind of significant, ominous number. And we graduated in 1969. That was my graduation year. But it was only after, and by the way, only one person out of those 3,000 students was black. Everyone else was Caucasian. But that didn't mean we felt unified in our cultural backgrounds, even though we were all Roman Catholic, because some of us were Italian. That could have been funny. Right? Hey, after all, that's the way they talk in Philly, You sound like you're Italian. Okay, that's just a joke, too. But when did I first begin seeing my place in a larger sense? It was really not until after I joined the Army. And once I was in the Army, I was mixed with lots of people. I went to basic training in Missouri, in Fort Leonard Wood, right? And very mixed group of folks. Not only in our appearance, but also in the way we spoke, and certainly in our educations. I remember, because I already had a master's degree when I enlisted in the Army. I know a lot of people think that was pretty silly, But remember, this was also right after the Vietnam War ended, and it was when it had first then become a volunteer army instead of the draft was over, and instead they raised how much they would pay people. They began using bonuses and things in order to lure people into the military. And I received an enlistment bonus of $16,900 when I passed my language course at the Defense Language Institute. And when I re-enlisted 3 years later, I received a $18,000 bonus for re-enlisting. Plus, throughout my career, they paid me monthly bonuses for my languages, which was why I took my tests in both German and French as well as Russian, so that I maxed out the bonuses that they could pay me, etc. So it was very lucrative, and it was also clearly the case that there was different social statuses in the military, not only rank, not only what your MOS was, what kind of unit you were in, but also, well, I guess it would have been the unit, because if you're in a military intelligence unit, you're basically with a lot of people that are college educated, and some that are getting their college, right? So the younger ones are in college, taking college courses, like, you might see a lot of people here that are military and taking their college courses now, right? But a lot of already college educated. My last duty station, for example, there were 3 of us that had master's degrees, 2 in philosophy and 1 in history, in my platoon in the Army, right? So we had far more education than our officers did, actually, which, if you can imagine, that kind of is a weird situation. But so when did I become aware of peculiar aspects of my identity vis-a-vis people that were other than me? Well, certainly visiting foreign countries, being in Germany, for example, and having people recognize me, me, right? Because I'm an American, you know. But who the heck wants to eat a pickle while you're walking along the zoo? That was pretty. I mean, there would be a pickle vendor selling pickles in little baggies. You could buy a great big pickle, and so he's standing there saying "Gierke, Gierke," which is pickle, right? And walking along, and he says "Gierke," no thanks, nein danke. And right away, of course, they look at you and me, like, of course you're not going to eat a pickle. You're an American, But what does that do? That says I'm different than that person. I don't eat pickles when I'm walking along with my kids in the zoo. That's just wrong. Who the heck eats a pickle by itself? Well, Germans do, apparently. But so of course, going to foreign countries, you learn, hey, I'm different than that. I don't think I learned that by studying foreign languages, because we are studying foreign languages, right? So everyone in high school is studying Latin. Everyone in my classes were studying French, right? You go to college, everybody has a minimum Romance language that they have to take at the college level in order to get their bachelor degree, right? So in my case, it was French, right? So everyone has to study this. So that doesn't make me feel like, the French people are like this and we're like this. No, because we're all studying French. That's one of the things we do, right? But once you're actually in the presence of other people, then your sense of identity changes, because now you're seeing people that really are quite different than you. they think differently. Might not even be able to communicate, depending. I didn't have trouble there. Of course, Germany. It was kind of silly because once they realized I was American, they wanted to speak in English to show me how much English they had learned. And of course, I wanted to speak auf Deutsch to show them how much I had learned in their language. And since I didn't speak German very well and they didn't speak English very well, we couldn't really understand one another when we did that. It was very clear to me that if they spoke German and I spoke English, we would probably understand one another pretty well. But since we tried to reverse that, it was kind of all muddled. But that was also fun. I remember joining like a family kind of mixing group. I forget what it was called, but we had dinner at a German family's house. They invited us over, and the main course was a pig leg. And they presented us with a dish with a big pig leg, which was full of fat. And my stomach did kind of a George Bush Sr. flip, you know, the way he threw up all over the Japanese minister when he was in Japan, right? I couldn't even think of eating this. There was like little bits of triangular shaped meat somewhere in the middle of it, so we ate that out, and of course we were still hungry and looking at this great big hunk of fat on the dish, and they're just eating it away. We're like, couldn't even imagine it, right? And peas. They had mixed a pea mash, right? That was the main course. We were horrified. Polite, of course, but we were like, these people, how did they get so big eating food like this? Sorry, quoting Yoda. But when we invited them over, it was for Thanksgiving dinner. And we had bought turkey because we had the American commissary, so we had turkey, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, all the things that you have, pumpkin pie, all the American things. And, the parents, of course, acted very much like we did when we were at their house. They were very, this is wonderful. But the kids, who are honest, right, are sitting there looking at everything with horror on their faces, wondering, what the heck is this stuff? Horrified by it. And it's like, but it's absolutely the best food in the world. And they couldn't stand it. And I learned that food is one of the sure ways of learning the differences in the identities of people. And by the way, the same thing, of course, applies here. When you I've been to places where they offered me native foods, a potluck kind of thing, and I looked at the stuff and I was like, what is this? And they wouldn't tell me, because they knew from their experience, if you tell these white people what this food is, they'll throw up on it or be upset. So don't tell them, just try it. And it was actually pretty tasty. I have no clue what it was. They never would tell me what it was. But it was okay. But, that's the same, especially when it comes to fat. I remember when I was translating for the Russian teams when they were here for the Arctic Winter Games, and the one coach was trying to find fat. We need fat. And the problem was our foods were too protein rich. They wanted fat. And so I actually took him to the butchers in Cars in Eagle River, because his team was staying at Chudiak High School. And so I took him to Cars, and we went to the butcher, and we asked, he needs fat. Is there any way that they could buy fat for their team? And no, we don't have any. So even the butcher doesn't get fat to trim off of the meats that they put out. So no, couldn't give you fat. I had no clue how we could get you that kind of food in this country. We don't eat it. And they were like starving for it, his whole team. You know, that's pretty mean and rotten, right? Invite teams over from foreign countries to have competitions and then not feed them while they're here for a couple of weeks. That's pretty horrible. How? So clearly, food is an important part of our identity. Wow, amazing. I mean, that's, you know, how many folks, you know, are absolutely horrified. Even when you're thinking of the social stratification in our own society, and you think about people that are horrified at just the thought of going to McDonald's. So do you admit that you go to McDonald's? Yeah. Do I point out to the people when I go to McDonald's and I order 20-piece chicken nuggets because it's only $6.50 for 20? You know, why would you buy less, right? And my dogs love them, right? Because you can hand a Chihuahua a chicken nugget and it's absolutely thrilled, right? St. Bernards swallow them whole practically, but you know, the Chihuahuas love the chicken nuggets, and they usually last 2 days in our house. But the McDonald's folks always ask with what kind of sauce. And I never want to tell them, well, we don't get sauce with our chicken nuggets because we don't want to give the dogs sauce. Is that bad? I don't know. But it even applies to places you shop. So if you go to Walmart, there are people in this town that will ostracize you and feel like you are just adding to the problem in our society. That's terrible. Now, something else I included in this, of course, is this wonderfully horrible debate with Christina Hoff Sommers, Milo Yiannopoulos, however you say it, and Stephen Crowder. Now,
hello, everyone. Thank you. It's good to see a packed house. Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Kyle Boyd, and I'm the president of the UMass College Republicans. Thank you. On behalf of my organization, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you all and thank you all for coming. Tonight's speakers have a lot to say, so in the interest of time, I want to keep my remarks short. But before I go over tonight's agenda and introduce our three guests, I'd like to say this. We have organized tonight's event to explore one single question. Has political correctness on college campuses gone too far? As a group...
So if you're watching this, or if you did watch it, I'd like to ask you the question, what is the role of being a university student today with regard to free speech? That would be my quiz question then. So what's your role as a student at a university with regard to free speech? And frankly, I don't think it's a big problem at the University of Alaska. People here seem sane, thank you. Students are absolutely wonderful, all of them, in every respect. And I'm not just saying that because the chancellor's in the area. That's true. I like the students here. People are nice. They have good intentions. They don't come to school feeling like their main job is to force their opinion on everyone else. But what are we looking at here? This is the University of Massachusetts. And Christina Hoff Sommers, I should perhaps explain who these folks are. How many of you are familiar with any of the people? You're all familiar with Milo, probably? He's notorious, right? My least favorite of the three, because I think he's so insulting to the students there. And Stephen is middle. Christina, of course, is absolutely a perfect example of an educated professor, philosophy professor from the University of Virginia. So let's look at her a little bit. She's been a favorite of mine as an author for quite a few years. She wrote Who Stole Feminism, which is a book that basically argues that it made sense to be a feminist up until all of a sudden feminism just went absolutely crazy, and as a result it deteriorated. Most people today, when I ask, are you a feminist, unless you're older, you usually wouldn't say you are. You think there's something wrong with people that are feminists. And that's what she is concerned about. Who stole it? Why did feminism stop being something that was worth everyone being? And instead now everyone tends to shy away from feminists because they tend to be hateful people, not helping the situation. She also wrote The War Against Boys, arguing that the way schools started to change reflected this attitude that being male was an evil thing. It causes wars, competition, hateful things. And so there was this movement to change young boys so that they wouldn't be so competitive. One of the ways, of course, of taking care of that is drugging young boys with things like Ritalin in order to make sure that they're a little bit more passive, that they'll sit in the class. I remember teaching, it was kind of an odd thing, since I had foreign languages, when I became a substitute teacher for the school district so that I could find out what our schools are like. One of my qualifications said that I was in foreign languages, right? So one morning they called me up. I think I might have mentioned this because it's one of my favorite experiences. They called me up early in the morning and said, "Do you speak Spanish?" And I was honest. I said, "No hablo español." Well, the person on the phone obviously didn't know that that meant no, and said, "Oh, that's perfect." And I didn't change her mind, right? And she assigned me to Spanish immersion kindergarten. And by the way, I don't speak Spanish. I know a few words, of course. But so, okay, it's interesting. Spanish immersion kindergarten. I ended up becoming a favorite for that. They called me a lot to do Spanish immersion kindergarten. I got on the list. Apparently there weren't very many folks available to sub for Spanish immersion kindergarten. It was very difficult, of course, because what you're doing is immersing yourself in a Spanish environment with kids, right? Of course, the worst thing I discovered was that when you have 25 kids that all line up to go out to recess, they stand there with their shoes on, waiting for you to tie every shoe. 25, that's 50 shoes to tie on little kids. And you know, I don't know why it should be difficult, because it's not really backwards, but when you're tying somebody else's shoe, you feel like you're all convoluted because it's not right, right? 25 pairs of shoes. But what was neat about that was that I was immersed in the kids' experience of that. But one of the boys was huge compared to all of the other ones. Same age, but he was like a head taller than all the others. Clearly an alpha male and needed alpha male stimulation. He wanted to do stuff. And of course, the job of the teacher in kindergarten is to have all the kids sit around in a circle and discuss the Spanish vocabulary of the day, right? Learn about the sun shining and the kind of weather, etc. And of course, this boy was absolutely not interested in being quiet, being still, sitting there in any sort of way. He was healthy. He needed something to do. So I gave him something to do. Of course, it was also attractive to other young males, not nearly as alpha as he was. And the trouble was, he was used to wanting to do stuff by himself. So when one of the other males asked, "Can I do the task that you gave him, because that's way more interesting than sitting in this circle listening to vocabulary," I said, "Sure." But of course, that didn't work out very well, because the bigger boy, boom, did what alphas do, right? What what people do to younglings, push them around, tears commenced, etc. And of course that, so the end of the day, and I remember that was Chugach Elementary, the one mother of that boy came charging in the door into the classroom and came running in and said, "What did he do today?" She was expecting trouble. And she was concerned and trying to figure out what the heck she was going to do to make this boy behave the way the docile kids in the class did. And I looked at her with horror, thinking, do not let them drug this boy. He is healthy. He needs activity. He's the healthiest kid in here. What, of course, the cultural climate would say is we need to drug this kid into submission. We need to take away his maleness, basically. And that's exactly what Christina Hoff Sommers is talking about in The War Against Boys. Here's a boy, a healthy boy, and what the cultural climate dominated by those who are influenced by feminism in the education environment. Want boys to be girls, because then they will be more behaved when they grow up to be men, because they'll be girls and they'll be women instead, and we'll have fewer wars, less competition, etc. Right? So the war against boys. By the way, as far as I know, that war isn't over, as far as I can tell. There's still an awful lot of those drugs out, less recess time, because what happens with recess is you end up then having less opportunity for physical activity, which is something that the boys typically in a recess environment engage in running around and sports, right? What do the girls do at recess? Apparently they cluster in groups and chat with one another. Is that about right? Anybody? I don't want to get anybody mad at me. So Christina Hoff Sommers, philosopher, University of Virginia, fascinating person. Lots of other... and by the way, in one of the other videos that I have her on, she's the one interviewing Roger Scruton, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's her. But how about Milo? So Milo So if I'm trying to figure out his identity, what does he himself say he is? Well, let me show you first some Christina Hoff Sommers.
They've taken on the extremes of intolerance. They demonize, they otherize, they attempt to censor. I demonstrate it here. And they're not even nice.
University of Massachusetts.
They're not even nice to each other. And they do. What you're doing is hateful. What you're doing it's not civil.
Please, if everybody could quiet down. These are our guests. We'd like to allow them to speak.
Boom.
So this is Steve Crowder.
Oh, you think this is going to get better? No. Is he going to check his privilege? That's not going to happen. I don't want to come out here and give someone the finger, but it's because you walk out and this chick is start a show like that. This is absurd. At least when you go back to like Christina Hoff Sommers days, self-professed Democrats, hippies, the retreads that you guys want to be, at least they thought they were fighting the system. They thought they were trying to create transparency. They really thought they were for free speech. You people are openly and completely against it. You're not fighting for free speech.
Which is a perfectly respectable mainstream party. The British National Party was a racist party led by a very odious character called Nick Griffin.
This is Milo.
Now, for a long time, the British National Party was doing very well, out of anxiety about, understandable, I think, anxiety about immigration and the changing nature of local communities. Lots of people started voting BNP in Britain. Now, these people weren't racist and bigots. They were voting out of anxiety and frustration. So here's what happened. Here's what happened when the media embargo, if you like, was lifted on the leader of the BNP. Nick Griffin appeared on the BBC's Question Time for 1 hour. This was at a time in which the BNP was controlling some local councils. They had successfully stood for election and won overall control of some local councils in Britain. Quite an extraordinary and not a particularly proud moment in British history. But the day Nick Griffin appeared on Question Time, and the BBC was criticised mercilessly for giving this guy a platform. This is hate speech, this is bigotry, he's a racist, how dare you put this man on TV. The BNP...
Oh, that was a clever one.
What happened, of course, as anyone with any brains would be able to predict, was that the BNP evaporated. When British people saw what the guy who ran this party was really like, they stopped voting for that party. A couple of years later, the BNP is no longer a force in British politics. This is why it isn't just important to give platforms to ordinary speech, it's important to give platforms to all speech. Because sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the best way to deal...
Absolutely.
The best way to deal with people that you don't agree with, whether they are conservatives or progressives, is the full glare of the spotlight, because you should have the confidence in your own opinions, and you should have the fortitude and courage to believe that you can beat them in a fair, open marketplace of ideas.
I couldn't imagine us inviting Milo here. I couldn't imagine it. I don't think anyone would invite him. And if he were here, I don't know what would happen. By the way, Slavoj Žižek is speaking in Winnipeg this weekend. Too far to go, but that would have been interesting. So, But what am I thinking of here? So, Christina is a conservative philosopher and has long stood as an exemplar against not feminism per se. She's definitely an advocate for feminism, but what she's in favor of, it would be something very similar to Helena Cronin. Remember Helena Cronin, the author of The Ant and the Peacock, who say women and men should be equal but different. Wow, but that's a phrase that often is just another way of being racist or whatever, right? Because how do we do that? How do you have separate but equal? But so I would say that her identity is pretty clear to me. Milo, on the other hand, is gay, Not that there's anything wrong with that. And by the way, I use that as a quote from Seinfeld, right? And I think that was tongue-in-cheek. Ooh, should I say that? However that works. I mean, I'm old enough that when I first learned the word gay, it meant something like happy. And queer, which is the French word for spoon. Queer, right, is a spoon, right? And if you think, how did that word become associated with the gay person? I guess because of the shape of the spoon? Spooning? I don't know. Anybody know where that came from? In any case, I don't know what to think of his identity. I think it would probably be very complex. I know that people have lots of strange feelings about him. And in fact, if I could find him responding to students here.
I won't say...
Although after tonight, therapy might not be a bad investment for these folks.
Yeah, there's a few people who could do with some Ambien here. I won't say too much about the wage gap because Christina's the expert on this, but just to make an observation, I'm a third of the way through into a 66 college tour, and I am in a position to make a couple of generalizations and observations. I am stunned by the indecorousness, rudeness, and plain lack of courtesy and respect shown to respected speakers by the left, and I see nothing even remotely comparable on the libertarian side or on the conservative side. The level of rudeness shown to your fellow audience members and to respected professors is so shocking to me. And it is not... Look, I go on Twitter and I go on Twitter and I do polls that say, would you rather your child had A, feminism, or B, cancer? Now, in the case of that poll, 22,000 people voted, and they voted in favor of cancer, 55-45. I had people writing to me saying, my mum just died of cancer, and I still voted cancer. I had people come to me saying, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor, and I still voted cancer. So I can understand why you might want to come and be rude to me, because I can take it, and I'm a provocateur, and I'm not going to do what you do, which is cry the victim afterwards. What I don't understand, and I have never understood, is the level of outright rudeness displayed to a classy lady who is coming here with facts and evidence to challenge your sloppy thinking. I've never understood it, and it speaks so poorly of you, and I just got a word of warning before I pass back. This is the year, just one word of warning for you guys. This is the year the public starts to see these videos. My college tour is penetrating way outside the media that is normally interested in this stuff. Your parents are going to start pulling you from college if you keep this shit up. They will not donate to these schools. Look at what has happened at Missouri. And I'll tell you something. You privileged, spoiled brats who come from nice middle-class families. Daddy pays your phone bill, Daddy bought you a car, Daddy pays your college fees. Not my daddy, your daddy. Not him. He wouldn't pay your fucking fees. I wonder what's going to happen when your parents see some of this stuff. Because let me tell you, the feedback so far from my tour has been abject horror. And I'll give you one data point, and that is Missouri, which bought into the worst kind of race-baiting, hoaxing, and lying from the student body. What has happened at Missouri? I'll tell you, 2 things have happened at Missouri. They have lost...
So, fun. This could have been inspiring, talking about identity, the lies that bind. I don't think it's right to call them lies. You might be able to argue that they're not real, but once we construct, this is the social construction monster that we'll talk about towards the end of the semester, fighting the social construction monster. But that doesn't mean that it's a lie. Money is socially constructed, but it's not a lie. We use it, we trust it. If you live in a place like Venezuela, it becomes pretty obvious that it's a lie. But nonetheless, you still need it in order to have commerce, etc. Any questions? Was this fun? By the way, I mentioned that the Chancellor and Dean Petraeus are in the area. That's supposedly the case. That's even why I wore a suit coat today, just in case I pass them while I'm walking to the admin building. But if you see them, say hello. And by the way, tell them how much you love philosophy. It's absolutely exciting. So they shouldn't cancel philosophy courses to save the budget. Who knows?
Such a good class, I get C's in it.
You get C's in it?
I get Z's in it.
Z's. You sleep through the class? Well, that's good. You need your sleep. I realize that if people fall asleep in my class, it's not because I'm boring. It's because they're tired. You know,
It's a perfect thing that just relaxes you.
well, that's good too. I'm glad to be relaxing.
What does the dean do versus the chancellor versus the president?
Well, the president of the UA system, we only have one, President Johnson, is the head executive over the whole thing, and he only answers to the Board of Regents. The next person in charge would be the chancellor of each of the major university elements. So the one would be Chancellor Sandine, who is the chancellor of UAA, and then there's a chancellor for UAF and UAS, right? And then under the chancellor there are provosts, and then under the provost there are deans, and the deans are in charge of the departments. So all the department chairs go to the deans, who then works with the provosts. So there's several different provosts. One is a provost of academics, and that would be the one that the deans report to. But the chancellor has her office on the second floor in the admin building. Dean Petraeus has his office where it's always been, as far as I know, over in the psychology department. So, Cass, have a good day.